Do you remember who you were? The voice cut through the silence, sharp, like a dagger slicing through the stillness of the night. Li Shu's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her vision. The air was heavy with the scent of dust, of sweat, of decay. It didn't smell like the mansion she had once called home. It didn't smell like wealth, like power. It smelled like survival. The room she found herself in was cramped, dimly lit by the glow of a single flickering bulb above. A small bed, a rickety table, an old wooden chair. No opulence, no luxury. Just the bare, cold reality of the life she had been thrust into. What happened to me? She could feel it, the weight of the unfamiliar body she was now trapped in, thin, fragile. A far cry from the slender, graceful figure she once flaunted in designer gowns and jewels. Her hands trembled as she touched her face, her skin rough, scarred by years of hardship. The memories came crashing back, not in the way one might recall an old dream, but in fragments, sharp, jagged, like shattered glass. Her name, Li Wei, the heiress of the Lai family, the jewel of the city. And then, he, Wei Zhihao, the man who had reduced her to nothing, the man who had taken her heart and crushed it under his arrogant heel. No, she thought, her breath catching in her throat. This isn't just a dream. This isn't just a fall from grace. This is a second chance. Li Wei had been untouchable. Her world was a world of luxury, silk dresses, glittering chandeliers, perfume that cost more than most people earned in a year. She had been courted by the finest suitors, admired by those who thought they knew what power was. But among all the men who vied for her attention, none stood out more than him, Wei Zhihao. He was the epitome of arrogance, born into wealth and power with a superiority that dripped from his every word. He had seen her, the heiress, the golden girl, and he had chosen her, or so she thought. But when it came down to it, he hadn't chosen her for love. No, he had chosen her because she was the perfect accessory, the jewel to sit beside his throne. The engagement had been a farce, a grand display of wealth, power, and superficiality. She had thought he loved her. He had smiled that dangerous smile, whispered sweet words into her ear, and promised a future that sparkled with happiness. She had been a fool. But when the truth had finally come to light, it shattered her. He had laughed in her face. Her tears had meant nothing to him. He had been playing a game, and she had been a pawn, easily discarded when she no longer suited his needs. Li Shu's chest tightened as she stumbled to her feet. She was no longer Li Wei, the pampered heiress, no longer the girl who had been loved by all, sought after by men and women alike. She was Li Shu now, a poor, nameless girl thrown into a world that didn't care. Her body was no longer her own, it was a shell, a reminder of all that had been taken from her. But she wasn't going to stay here. She wouldn't let this life be her end. No, this was just the beginning. 2 weeks had passed since Li Shu had woken in this new life, and she had already started to make a name for herself. In a world where survival was a constant battle, she had learned quickly. Her sharp mind, her ability to read people, her understanding of power, these were the tools she would use to rise again. But she needed one thing above all else. Him. Her eyes narrowed as she saw him across the street, standing tall, surrounded by a group of admirers, his face as arrogant as ever. Wei Zhihao, the man who had ruined her, the man who had made her believe in something that wasn't real. But now? Now she was going to make him pay. She wasn't the naive girl she used to be, the one who had desperately begged for his affection. Now, she was the woman who would make him fall in love with her. And when he did, she would tear his heart out and watch him beg for her, the way she had once begged for him. Wei Zhihao noticed her approach, his eyes narrowing. The old Li Wei, the girl who had once captivated his attention, was gone. This new Li Shu was something else entirely. She was different, harder, colder. There was a fire in her eyes, something dangerous that sent a shiver down his spine. But what disturbed him most was the way she held herself, confident, powerful, as though she had always belonged to this world. "What do you want, Shu?" His voice was smooth, as it always had been, but there was something in his tone now. Something that hinted at the unease he was trying so hard to mask. Li Shu smiled, and it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was a smile of strategy, of a woman who had found her strength. "I don't want anything, Wei Zhihao. Not from you." He raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you want?" She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I want you to know exactly what it feels like to have everything you've ever wanted within your grasp, only to realize it's slipping through your fingers. I want you to feel the helplessness I once felt." He scoffed, clearly unbothered. "You think you can hurt me? You think you can make me care?" She tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that was both dangerous and enticing. "I don't need to make you care, I just need to make you fall for me. And when you do, you'll realize you never had control. You were always just a player in my game." Wei Zhihao didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, a strange mix of admiration and confusion in his eyes. The girl before him wasn't the fragile Li Wei he had once known. She was a force to be reckoned with. He wouldn't admit it, not aloud, but in that moment, Wei Zhihao understood. This game had changed. And she was the one holding all the cards. The days blurred into one another as Li Shu began her silent crusade, a war fought in shadows, whispered words, and fleeting glances. Every move she made was calculated, every word spoken with purpose. The person she had been in her previous life, the naive, trusting girl, was gone. In her place stood a woman with a burning determination, a woman who had learned that power wasn't handed to you, it was taken, piece by piece. Li Shu had always understood the power of perception. In her old life, she had been the epitome of grace and poise, the socialite who could charm anyone with a smile, a laugh, a well-timed compliment. But the mask she wore now was different. The smile she offered now was cool, calculating, with a hint of something darker lurking behind her eyes. People saw her as weak, as a victim. Let them. It would make it all the sweeter when they learned the truth. Her first target was the old man who ran a small but powerful underground network in the city. His name was Old Zhang, a man with eyes that had seen too many things to be fooled by anyone. Yet, he had one weakness, his greed. And that, Li Shu knew, was her leverage. She had heard whispers of his desire to expand his influence, and she had plans to make him an ally, not just a pawn. Li Shu stood at the entrance of a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of the city's busiest district. Her fingers brushed over the collar of her worn jacket, adjusting it for the 100th time as if to remind herself she was still in control. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. It was time to play the game. Old Zhang had arranged the meeting, thinking he was the one with the upper hand. He was used to women like Li Shu, unassuming, desperate, eager for a deal. But beneath her exterior, he would find that she was anything but ordinary. The door creaked open, and a wave of stale air rushed inside, carrying with it the scent of tobacco smoke and something more, the promise of betrayal. Li Shu's eyes locked onto Old Zhang's figure, seated at a corner table, his graying beard the only sign of his age. His eyes, sharp and calculating, didn't miss a thing. "Ah, Miss Shu," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." Li Shu didn't respond immediately. She slid into the chair across from him, her gaze unwavering. The silence between them was thick, heavy, but she could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was used to intimidation, but this was different. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here for favors. She was here to take control. "Old Zhang," she began, her voice soft but commanding. "I'm not here to waste your time. I know what you want: power, control, money. I can give you that. But first, you need to prove your worth to me." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And how would I do that, monsieur?" "You have connections," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You move people, you influence markets, but you can't control the one thing that matters most: people's hearts. You don't know how to make them want to follow you. I can teach you that, but only if you trust me." For a moment, Old Zhang didn't speak. The flicker of skepticism in his eyes was replaced by something else: curiosity. The way Li Shu spoke, so assured, so confident, made him question his previous assumptions. She wasn't just another desperate soul. She was someone with a plan, a mind sharp enough to make even a man like him pause. "I don't trust easily, Shu," old Zhang said finally, his voice low. "But I've seen enough to know you're not a fool. So tell me, what's your price?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want Zhihao." The name hung in the air between them like a silent challenge, a gauntlet thrown down with deliberate force. Old Zhang's expression faltered for a brief second. The name Wei Zhihao was one that was known far and wide. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. To even think of using him as a pawn in a game was dangerous. "You want to use him?" old Zhang asked, the skepticism creeping back into his voice. "No," Li Shu corrected, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "I don't want to use him. I want to break him. I want to make him fall in love with me, and when he does, I'll watch him beg for me. Then I'll show him just how fragile his world really is." Old Zhang stared at her, his lips pressed tightly together. "That's a dangerous game, girl, and it's not just his heart you'll be playing with. You'll be playing with everything. His wealth, his reputation, his influence." Li Shu smiled, leaning back in her chair. "And not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of anyone. This is a game I'm going to win." As the days passed, Li Shu meticulously began laying the groundwork for her plan. She knew that to take down Wei Zhihao, she couldn't go at him directly. No, she had to be subtle, to break down his defenses from the inside out. And the best way to do that was through those closest to him, the people who admired him, who followed him, who believed he was untouchable. Her first target was Zhao Mei, Wei Zhihao's personal assistant. The woman was ambitious, ruthless, and far too eager to please her boss. Li Shu knew that a few well-placed words and a bit of manipulation could turn Zhao Mei into an ally. It was a Tuesday when Li Shu found herself sitting across from Zhao Mei in one of the city's high-end tea houses. The atmosphere was elegant, the scent of jasmine filling the air, but the tension between the two women was palpable. Zhao Mei regarded Li Shu with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, unsure of why this poor, scrappy girl was sitting across from her, speaking in such a calm, measured tone. "I've heard things about you, Miss Shu," Zhao Mei said, her voice clipped, her eyes scanning Li Shu as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle. "Things that don't add up." Li Shu smiled, her gaze unwavering. "What kind of things?" "People say you're playing a dangerous game," Zhao Mei replied, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "That you're trying to climb your way into high society with methods that are less than conventional." Li Shu leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "People talk too much, and most of the time they talk about things they don't understand." "But what if I told you I could offer you a seat at the table, his table? What if I could make you more valuable to him than you already are?" Zhao Mei's eyes narrowed, a flash of interest crossing her face. "And why would you do that?" Li Shu's smile grew colder, more dangerous. "Because I know you want more. You want to be more than just his assistant. You want to be his equal. I can make that happen. But first, you have to prove that you're loyal to me." Zhao Mei remained silent, but Li Shu could see the wheels turning in her mind. The offer was tempting, too tempting for someone like Zhao Mei, who had long lived in the shadow of Wei Zhihao's success. And just like that, Li Shu had her first ally in the war for Wei Zhihao's heart and his downfall. Li Shu knew that with every passing day, she was getting closer to her goal. She could feel the tension building, not just between her and Wei Zhihao, but in the world she was about to tear apart. The closer she got to him, the more dangerous the game became. But she didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. The fire in her heart burned brighter than the fear that tried to creep in. Her plans were already set in motion. The game had begun, and Wei Zhihao had no idea that the woman he had once mocked was about to become his greatest adversary. And this time, it wasn't just his heart she was after. It was his entire world. Li Shu had become a shadow in the city, an enigma, a woman no one truly understood. She had spent the past month weaving her web, spinning a delicate tapestry of relationships, favors, and subtle manipulations that would lead her to one goal, Wei Zhihao. But in order to reach him, she needed to break down everything he stood for, And she wasn't just targeting him anymore, she was targeting his world. Her first step had been to secure Zhao Mei's loyalty, but she knew she couldn't stop there. Zhao Mei, though ambitious, was but a cog in a much larger machine. The next step in her plan was a far riskier proposition. She needed to gain the trust of Wei Zhihao's closest friend and confidant, a man named Jiang Hui. Jiang Hui was known for his ruthless business acumen, his ability to sniff out betrayal before it even happened. His loyalty to Wei Zhihao was absolute, or so it seemed. But Li Shu had done her homework. She had learned that beneath the surface of his cold demeanor, Jiang Hui harbored his own secrets that, if revealed, could ruin him. It was these secrets that Li Shu would use to her advantage, but she needed to approach him carefully. He wasn't someone who could be manipulated with half-truths. He needed to see her as an ally, not a threat. The location was carefully chosen, a small, private club on the outskirts of the city, a place where businessmen like Jiang Hui could unwind without attracting attention. Li Shu had arrived early, her posture straight, her mind focused. She knew the stakes of this meeting. If she failed here, everything would fall apart. Jiang Hui entered the club just as the clock struck 8. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his every movement precise, calculated. His cold, calculating gaze scanned the room as he walked toward the corner booth, where Li Shu sat waiting. "Miss Shu," he greeted her, his voice smooth and impersonal, as if he were acknowledging an acquaintance rather than a potential ally. "I didn't expect you to be the type to socialize in places like this." Li Shu smiled, the warmth in her eyes belying the calculating thoughts in her head. "I'm full of surprises, Jiang Hui," she said, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. "But then again, you know that nothing is as it seems in this city." Jiang Hui didn't reply immediately. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if he were weighing something. Li Shu could almost hear the gears turning in his head. She had always been able to read people with unnerving accuracy, and she knew he was deciding whether she was worth his time. After a long pause, he sat down across from her, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. "What is it that you want from me, Miss Shu?" Jiang Hui asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "I don't have time for games." Li Shu leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to help me take down Wei Zhihao." At her words, Jiang Hui's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, disbelief, maybe even a hint of amusement. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said. "But why would I help you? What could you possibly offer me that would make it worth my time?" Li Shu's lips curled into a smile, but it was sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You have secrets, Jiang Hui. Secrets that, if they ever came to light, would ruin you. I know what you've been hiding, and I can help you keep it buried, but only if you help me." Jiang Hui's expression hardened, and for a moment, the cold, calculating man that everyone feared emerged. "What kind of game are you playing, Sayu? Do you really think you can intimidate me with threats?" "I've made it this far because I don't scare easily." "I'm not threatening you," Li Shu said, her voice calm and controlled. "I'm offering you a choice. Help me take Wei Zhihao down, and I'll make sure your secret stays safe. Refuse, and I'll make sure it's the last thing you ever have to worry about." There was a long, tense silence as Jiang Hui studied her, his mind clearly racing. He wasn't used to being the one on the defensive, but there was something about Li Shu's words, her confidence, that made him hesitate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "I'll help you," he said, his voice low. "But remember this, you. I don't do favors for free. You'll owe me." Li Shu's smile widened. "Deal?" With Jiang Hui's cooperation in place, Li Shu's position grew stronger. But there was one last obstacle before she could make her move. Wei Zhihao himself. She had already made him feel a faint stir of curiosity, but it was nowhere near enough. She needed him to notice her, to want her. And to do that, she would need to play a game he couldn't ignore. The upcoming charity gala would be the perfect opportunity. Every major player in the city would be there, and Wei Zhihao, ever the socialite, would be at the center of it all. It would be the perfect stage for Li Shu to make her move. She spent days preparing, choosing the perfect dress, rehearsing every word, every gesture, every look. The gala was not just a social event, it was a battlefield, and Li Shu intended to leave her mark. The night of the gala arrived, and Li Shu stood in front of the mirror, her reflection a vision of cold elegance. The dress she wore was simple, understated, yet undeniably striking. It clung to her body in all the right places, accentuating her new form, a far cry from the fragile, orphaned girl she had once been. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, sophisticated bun, and her makeup was flawless. Her lips painted the perfect shade of red. She was no longer the girl who had been discarded. She was a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. When she entered the gala, she felt the eyes of the room turn toward her. She walked with purpose, her gaze scanning the crowd until it landed on him. Wei Zhihao, standing at the center of the room, surrounded by admirers, his confident smirk in place. He looked just as he had in her memories, untouchable, superior, invincible. But as their eyes met, something changed. Something flickered in his gaze, and for the briefest moment, Li Shu saw doubt in his eyes. He didn't recognize her immediately, but the power dynamic had already shifted. She was no longer the girl he could dismiss with a glance. Now, she was someone to be reckoned with. She walked toward him, each step measured, deliberate. As she neared, she could feel the tension between them growing, the air thick with anticipation. "Miss Yu," Wei Zhihao said, his voice cool, yet there was an undercurrent of something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or was it something deeper? "I didn't expect to see you here." Li Shu smiled, her eyes never leaving his. "I suppose you didn't expect to see me at all, but here I am. And I must say, I'm not as invisible as I once was." Wei Zhihao. Their conversation continued, but Li Shu could feel the power shift. She wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. She was someone who commanded attention, who forced people to take notice. And as she spoke to Wei Zhihao, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The game was about to get much more complicated, and Wei Zhihao had no idea what he was stepping into. Every word, every glance, every touch would be a step closer to the inevitable, when he would fall for her. And when he did, she would show him just how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. The days following the gala were a blur of fleeting moments, each one significant, each one moving her closer to her goal. Li Shu stood at the edge of a precipice, looking down at a world she was about to reshape. The delicate web she had woven was starting to take hold, and she could feel the shift in Wei Zhihao's demeanor. He had noticed her, truly noticed her, for the first time in years. She knew the next step would be the most dangerous, provoking him. She had to make him feel something real, something deep. She had to make him desperate, but she also had to ensure that her steps remained hidden, that her game was never exposed until the final moment. This was the most intricate dance of her life. Li Shu's first step in provoking him had already been set in motion. She knew Wei Zhihao's pride, his ego. He wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful in every sense of the word, and men like him never liked to feel vulnerable. They liked to control everything, including the people in their lives. She had to break that control, shatter the illusion of his power. But she wasn't going to do it directly. No. She would do it the way he had done to her, by making him believe she was someone else entirely, someone he could not understand, someone he couldn't predict. The morning after the gala, Li Shu made a phone call. The number belonged to one of Wei Zhihao's oldest friends, a man named Li Ming. He had known Wei Zhihao since childhood, and while he wasn't the most powerful figure in the business world, his connections and loyalty to Wei Zhihao were unmatched. He was also someone who had always been fascinated by Li Wei, the girl who had once been promised to his friend. Li Ming picked up after the second ring, his voice warm but cautious. "Li Shu," he said, his tone both surprised and curious. "To what do I owe this unexpected call?" Li Shu smiled, leaning against the windowsill of her small apartment. The city spread out beneath her like a vast chessboard. "I thought it was time for us to talk, Li Ming. After all, I've seen how much you admire my past self. Li Wei, the girl who once had the world at her feet. But now I'm no longer that girl. I'm someone new. There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. Li Ming didn't respond right away, but she could feel him processing her words. What are you getting at, Li Shu? He asked, his voice cautious, but there was an underlying interest. I want you to arrange a meeting with Wei Zhihao, she said, her voice steady, almost casual. Tell him that I've changed, that I've moved on from the past, but I still remember the man he once was. Maybe we should talk about old times, just the three of us. Li Ming hesitated for another moment. You want me to set you up with him? He asked, his voice now laced with disbelief. Li Shu's smile widened. Yes, tell him I've learned more than he thought I ever could, and tell him I'm not afraid anymore. 2 days later, Li Shu found herself standing in front of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. She had dressed carefully, nothing too flashy but enough to draw attention. The deep blue silk dress she wore clung to her body in all the right places, the plunging neckline just enough to leave an impression without crossing any lines. Her makeup was subtle, but her eyes were the focal point, sharp, cold, and commanding. She had been waiting for this moment for years. But she was not nervous. She wasn't the naive girl she had once been, chasing after the man who had discarded her. No. Now she was the woman who would make him beg for her. Wei Zhihao had agreed to the meeting, and while Li Ming had been the one to arrange it, she knew it was only because of his lingering affection for her old self. She was no longer Li Wei, but to Wei Zhihao, she was still a puzzle, a mystery he hadn't solved yet. She had learned enough about his nature to know that he didn't like uncertainty. He thrived on control, on having everything within his grasp. And that was why she would shatter that control, by being the one thing he couldn't have, couldn't predict. When Wei Zhihao arrived, it was as if the room's temperature dropped. He walked in, tall and confident, his tailored suit fitting him like armor. His cold, calculating gaze scanned the room until it landed on her. His expression faltered for a brief second, but he quickly recovered, his usual arrogance returning as he strode toward her. You wanted to see me? He asked, his tone neutral, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity, confusion. Li Shu stood up slowly, her gaze never leaving his. I thought it was time we had a conversation, she said, her voice low and steady, tinged with an unmistakable hint of challenge. About us? About what happened? About how we both got here? He narrowed his eyes, taking a seat across from her without breaking eye contact. I'm not sure what you expect from me, Shu, he said, his voice colder now. But let's make this quick. I don't have time for games. Li Shu leaned forward, her gaze intense. That's the problem, Wei Zhihao, she said softly. You think this is a game. You think you're the one in control. But you've lost that control. You've lost it the moment you discarded me. His expression shifted, just slightly. The arrogance faltered, replaced by a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps. But Li Shu wasn't sure. She wasn't here to pity him. She was here to break him. You're right, he said, his voice quieter now. I did what I had to do. I'm not sorry for it. Li Shu smiled, but it wasn't a smile of affection. It was a smile of knowing, of power. No, Wei Zhihao, you're not sorry. But I think you will be. She leaned in closer, her voice a soft whisper. You're going to fall in love with me. And when you do, you'll understand what it feels like to be used. He froze, his gaze locked on hers. For the first time in years, the powerful man was unsure. His jaw tightened as he leaned back in his chair, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was too late. Li Shu had already planted the seed of doubt in his mind. You think you have me figured out, he said, his voice low. But there was a tremor of uncertainty in it now. But you don't know me, Shu. You never did. Li Shu's smile widened. I know you better than you think, Wei Zhihao. You'll see. Soon enough, you'll see. The rest of the dinner passed in silence, but Li Shu could feel the shift in their dynamic. Wei Zhihao was no longer the man who could dismiss her with a glance. He was unsure, rattled, and despite himself, he was intrigued. As they parted ways, he didn't say another word, but the lingering glance he gave her told her everything. The seed had been planted. Wei Zhihao would fall in love with her. He had no choice. The following days were filled with tension, with Wei Zhihao becoming more and more restless. He had made a point to avoid Li Shu after their dinner, but she could feel the invisible pull he still had toward her. She wasn't the only one who could play games, after all. Li Ming had reported that Wei Zhihao had been asking about her, trying to understand what had changed, why she had become this different woman, this woman who wasn't just another trophy for him to conquer. Li Shu's plan was working, but this was only the beginning. She had drawn the first blood in this battle of hearts and minds. She had him on the edge, teetering between control and chaos, and she would push him over the edge. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't just about making him pay for what he did to her. This was about making him realize that he had underestimated her. And when he realized that, it would be too late. Li Shu stood before the mirror, her reflection an image of calculated beauty. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable, yet every inch of her was a creation of her own making. Gone was the fragile orphan, the girl discarded like an unwanted toy. She had morphed into something far more dangerous, far more powerful. Tonight, she would make him see her. Tonight, she would make Wei Zhihao realize that the delicate balance of his world was no longer in his control. Every move, every glance, every word she spoke would bring her one step closer to breaking him. But breaking him wasn't enough. She had to leave him shattered, begging for her, knowing that he would never, ever have her. The night's gala was the perfect stage. But for Li Shu, it wasn't just a social event. It was the beginning of the end. The charity gala was one of the most anticipated events of the year. It was more than a mere social gathering. It was a battleground where the city's elite showcased their power, their influence, and their connections. The champagne flowed freely, the guests were dressed in the finest designer clothes, and every corner of the hall gleamed with wealth and prestige. Li Shu's heart raced as she stepped into the grand ballroom, the murmur of conversation mixing with the soft strains of a string quartet. But it wasn't the lavish decor or the prestigious guests that captured her attention. It was him. Wei Zhihao stood at the center of the room, his back straight, his gaze as cold and calculating as ever. He was a king in his element, surrounded by adoring followers, his every word weighed with power. But tonight, he wouldn't be the one in control. Tonight, Li Shu would make sure of it. She moved through the crowd, her every step deliberate, her eyes never leaving him. As she approached, she could feel the energy around her change. Whispers of surprise followed her every move as people recognized her, but none dared approach. Her transformation was complete. She was no longer the girl they once knew. She was a woman now, strong, assertive, and fully aware of her power. When she reached him, Wei Zhihao's eyes flickered with recognition. He had been speaking with a group of investors, but as soon as she appeared, they all fell silent. His gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time in years, she saw something shift in his eyes. Confusion, hesitation, maybe even a trace of fear. "Li Shu," he said, his voice neutral, but she could sense the tension beneath it. He was trying to maintain control, but she could feel the power shifting between them. "Wei Zhihao," she replied, her voice smooth and calm. "I didn't expect to see you here." He gave her a tight smile. "It's a public event, Shu." "What did you expect?" Li Shu's lips curled into a smile, but there was nothing warm about it. "I expected you to stay away. But here you are, as arrogant as ever." His expression tightened, the faintest flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I'm not sure what you're trying to prove, but I don't have time for games tonight." "Then why are you still standing here?" she asked, her tone playful but laced with something far more dangerous. She leaned in closer, the scent of her perfume filling the air between them. "Or maybe it's that you're afraid to face me, afraid that the girl you discarded has turned into something unrecognizable." Wei Zhihao's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Li Shu saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cold, controlled expression that had made him so formidable. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice low and steady. But Li Shu could hear the lie in his words. "You should be," she replied softly, her gaze never leaving his. "You should be very afraid." The conversation ended abruptly as a group of important guests arrived, and Wei Zhihao was forced to turn his attention back to them. But the damage had already been done. Li Shu had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, and she knew it. She could feel the tension in the air, the way he seemed to withdraw just a little further, as if he were trying to protect himself from something he couldn't quite understand. As the night wore on, Li Shu mingled with the other guests, always keeping her distance from Wei Zhihao, but never letting him out of her sight. She could feel his gaze on her more than once, lingering, unsure. He was watching her, and the uncertainty in his eyes was the first crack in the armor he had worn for so long. She had achieved her goal for the evening, to make him uncomfortable, to make him question everything he thought he knew about her. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, Li Shu found herself standing alone in the balcony overlooking the city. The cool breeze swept through her hair, the soft glow of the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was it. She had him where she wanted him. The next move was crucial. A soft sound behind her broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Wei Zhihao standing there, his figure silhouetted by the light behind him. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low, almost accusing. Li Shu raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a small smile. "Avoiding you? I didn't realize you were the one in control here." He didn't respond, his gaze locking onto hers. There was a tension between them now, an invisible thread pulling them closer, yet pushing them apart at the same time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Wei Zhihao stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He wasn't the arrogant man he had been earlier that night. He was a man vulnerable, unsure of how to navigate the maze Li Shu had carefully constructed. "And you think you've won," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't understand me. You don't know what I'm capable of." Li Shu's smile deepened, but her eyes were cold, calculated. "I know you better than you think, Wei Zhihao. I know everything about you, your secrets, your fears, and one day you'll beg me to forgive you." His face tightened, a flash of anger flickering in his eyes. But he didn't move, didn't respond. For a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Then, with a sudden, sharp movement, he turned and walked away, leaving Li Shu standing alone in the dim light of the balcony. As the night ended, Li Shu couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something significant had changed in Wei Zhihao. She had seen it in his eyes. She had seen the uncertainty, the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath the layers of arrogance and power. For the first time in years, he was afraid. She knew he was beginning to feel something for her, something deeper than he wanted to admit. She had shattered the illusion of control he had over her, and now he was just another pawn in her game. But Li Shu wasn't finished yet. No. This was only the beginning. She had him where she wanted him now. And soon, she would make him fall in love with her. She would break him, piece by piece. And when he was on his knees, begging for forgiveness, she would be the one to decide his fate. In the days that followed the gala, Li Shu's influence continued to grow. Wei Zihao's interest in her had shifted from indifference to curiosity, and from curiosity to something far more dangerous: obsession. He began seeking her out, though he never admitted it. He sent messages, made excuses to meet. It was subtle at first, an invitation to dinner here, a request for a business partnership there, but Li Shu could see through it. He was trying to regain control, trying to pretend he hadn't been rattled by her presence. But she knew better. She had already won. Wei Zhihao was falling into her trap, and soon he would realize that the game was no longer one he could control. The days after the gala passed in a blur of tension and calculated moves. Li Shu knew that she had planted the seed of doubt in Wei Zhihao's mind, but it wasn't enough. He was proud, too proud to acknowledge that she had the power to shake his carefully constructed world. But she could see it. He was slipping, inch by inch, drawn closer to her despite himself. It was time to turn the heat up, to push him into a corner where he had no choice but to fall for her. But she couldn't rush it. She had to be methodical, patient. She had to wait for the moment when his pride, his arrogance, would give way to something far more dangerous: desperation. Li Shu had learned long ago that power wasn't just about controlling others, it was about controlling oneself. And right now, she was controlling every aspect of this game. Wei Zhihao had no idea what was coming. It was a Thursday afternoon when Li Shu received a message from Wei Zhihao. It was brief, nothing more than a simple invitation to dinner, but the words were carefully chosen. "I would like to speak with you. Alone." Her fingers hovered over the screen of her phone for a moment. This was the moment she had been waiting for. It had been days since their last meeting, and while she had played it cool, letting him come to her on his terms, now was the time to take control. She had known that Wei Zhihao would come to her. His curiosity would not allow him to stay away for long, but curiosity alone wouldn't keep him coming back. No, she needed to make him crave her presence. She needed to make him feel like he couldn't live without her. She accepted the invitation. The restaurant was one of the finest in the city, a luxurious, intimate place that catered to the elite. The atmosphere was subdued, with soft candlelight casting shadows over the plush velvet chairs. Li Shu arrived early, choosing a table near the window where she could look out over the city, but also keep a close eye on her surroundings. She had dressed carefully for the occasion. Her outfit was elegant, but not overtly flashy. It was understated, but the deep red dress she wore clung to her body in all the right places, accentuating her curves without drawing too much attention. Her hair was pinned up in an intricate bun, and her makeup was soft but striking, her eyes smoldering with a promise of things unsaid. When Wei Zhihao arrived, he was as immaculate as ever, tall, confident, his sharp eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade, and all that remained was the tension between them, the invisible pull that had been growing since their first encounter. He didn't say a word at first. He simply took the seat across from her, his gaze never leaving hers. Li Shu noticed the subtle change in him, the stiffness in his posture, the way he tried to hide the flicker of uncertainty behind his usual cold mask. "Li Shu," he finally said, his voice low. "You've been avoiding me." Li Shu smiled, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that almost made him falter. "I haven't been avoiding you, Wei Zhihao. I've been waiting for you to come to me." "And here you are." He said nothing in response, his eyes narrowing slightly. She could see that he was trying to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The game had already shifted in her favor. "Why did you call me here?" Li Shu asked, her voice smooth, like honey. "What is it that you want?" He hesitated for just a second, just long enough for Li Shu to see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about you. About us. About everything." Li Shu leaned in slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "You think about me?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "Tell me, Wei Zhihao, what exactly do you think about?" He froze, caught off guard by her directness. "I think about how things have changed," he said, his voice faltering just slightly. "How I don't know what's happening anymore. How you've changed." Li Shu's smile deepened. "You still don't understand, do you?" she whispered. "You think you have control over me. But it's the other way around now." The dinner continued in silence for a few moments, the tension between them palpable, but Li Shu could feel the change in him. He was no longer the confident, arrogant man who had dismissed her so easily. He was now unsure, his mind racing, his heart struggling to keep up with the shifting dynamics between them. She let the silence stretch, enjoying the discomfort she could feel radiating from him. She could see the way he shifted in his seat, the way he reached for his wine glass but didn't drink from it. He was nervous, and that was exactly what she wanted. "I've been thinking about you too," Li Shu said, her voice soft but laced with something far more dangerous. "About how you broke me. About how I gave everything to you, and you threw it all away without a second thought." Wei Zhihao's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, perhaps? But Li Shu wasn't interested in his guilt. She wasn't here for apologies. No, she was here to make him realize that the tables had turned. "You were never nothing," he said, his voice suddenly more intense. "You were the woman I wanted, the woman I thought I could have. But you were always too fragile, too eager to please. That's what made me leave you. You didn't know how to keep me interested." Li Shu's laughter was soft, but it carried an edge. "I wasn't fragile, Wei Zhihao. I was blinded by you. I wanted to believe in something real. But now, I see you for what you really are. A man who never loved me. A man who thought he could discard me and move on to something else." His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You don't know anything about me." Li Shu leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "I know everything about you. I know how you use people, how you play with their emotions and then walk away when it no longer suits you. But I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not the one who chases after your approval. I'm the one who decides whether or not you're worthy of my time." He stared at her, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "You've changed," he whispered, almost to himself. "Yes, I have," she replied, "and so have you. You just don't realize it yet." The night wore on, the conversation slipping into more subtle manipulations, as Li Shu drew him further into her web. She spoke with calculated precision, each word carefully placed to make him feel what she wanted him to feel: confusion, desire, frustration, and ultimately the gnawing sense of wanting something he couldn't have. As the dinner came to a close, Wei Zhihao seemed on edge, his usual composure slipping. Li Shu could see the cracks, the tension building beneath the surface. She stood up, her gaze never leaving his, and with one last, lingering look she leaned forward, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. A kiss that lingered just a second too long. "I'll see you soon, Wei Zhihao," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "But next time, I'll be the one in control." When Li Shu left the restaurant, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had him right where she wanted him, unsure, desperate, and most importantly, intrigued. The next few days were filled with tension. Wei Zhihao's calls became more frequent, his messages more urgent. He needed answers. Needed to understand what was happening to him, why he couldn't let her go. But Li Shu was silent. She wasn't going to make it easy for him. She was the one in control now. Wei Zhihao was starting to crack, and she was going to break him, piece by piece. Weeks passed since that dinner, and with each passing day, the grip Li Shu had on Wei Zhihao tightened. He was no longer the man who could look at her with indifference. No. Now he was the one seeking her out, sending messages, making excuses to cross her path. But the game was far from over. She had him where she wanted him, hooked, obsessed, and unaware of the impending storm. It was time to make her final move. Li Shu had always known that the end of this game would be the most difficult, the most dangerous. She had brought Wei Zhihao to the edge, but now she had to push him over it. Every fiber of her being screamed to break free from the games, to tear down the walls she had built around her heart. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until everything was in place. She had watched him, the way he seemed to grow restless with every passing day, how his arrogance slipped just a little more with every encounter. He was unraveling, and she could feel it. But she had to be patient. One wrong move and the entire facade would crumble. Li Shu's phone buzzed on the desk in front of her. She picked it up, her fingers hovering over the screen as she read the message. "We need to talk. Can we meet?" The sender was, of course, Wei Zhihao. The message was simple, almost too simple. And in it, Li Shu could feel the weight of his desperation. He was no longer the man who had rejected her, the man who had tossed her aside like an inconvenient memory. No, he was the man who had been ensnared by his own emotions, and he didn't know how to escape. Li Shu smiled. The moment had arrived. The place they chose to meet was a quiet, secluded cafe, far from the hustle and bustle of the city's elite circles. It was the perfect location, intimate, private, where they could have a conversation without interruptions. Li Shu arrived early, the quiet hum of the cafe filling the air. The soft lighting, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, it all made her feel oddly calm, as though she were in complete control of the situation. As she waited, her mind replayed the events that had brought her here. The years of pain, the rejection, the heartache, and now, the culmination of it all. It had been a long and arduous journey, but it was worth it. She had become something stronger, more dangerous than she had ever been. The door opened, and Wei Zhihao walked in. His presence filled the room, as always, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. But today, he looked different. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something else. Something desperate. Li Shu didn't stand when he walked in. Instead, she simply looked up, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that rattled him. His gaze flickered for a moment before he made his way to the table. "I thought you'd never agree to see me," he said, his voice a little more strained than usual. "I wasn't sure I wanted to," she replied coolly, her tone unwavering. "But now, I think we need to talk, don't we?" Wei Zhihao took a seat, his posture stiff, as if he were still trying to maintain control over the situation. But Li Shu could see the cracks. The man who had once dismissed her as insignificant was now the one desperately clinging to whatever power he had left. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low. "Why?" Li Shu leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been waiting for you to come to me. I wanted you to realize what you've done. To understand the gravity of it all." He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" Li Shu smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that held no warmth. "You used me. You tossed me aside like a broken toy when I wasn't useful to you anymore. You thought you could move on to someone else, someone younger, someone easier. But what you didn't realize is that you've made a mistake." His eyes narrowed. "You think you've got me figured out? You think you know me?" "Yes," she said, her voice almost a whisper now. "I know you better than you know yourself, Wei Zhihao. I know that beneath all that power, beneath all that control, you're terrified. You're terrified of losing everything. And you're terrified of being nothing." His jaw clenched, and for a brief moment, the mask of indifference slipped. "I'm not afraid of anything." Li Shu chuckled softly. "That's where you're wrong. You've been afraid from the very beginning. And now, you're afraid of me." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Wei Zhihao's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and something else, something he didn't want to admit. She could see it now. He had been trying to keep control, trying to maintain his distance, but in doing so, he had made himself vulnerable. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you're in control, but you're not. You never were." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, charged with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Wei Zhihao seemed to be searching for something, an answer, perhaps, or a way to fix everything that had gone wrong between them, but there was no fixing it now. It was too late. Li Shu broke the silence with a single devastating question. "Do you love her, Wei Zhihao? Do you love the woman you left me for?" His eyes flickered, and for the first time, Li Shu saw the truth in them. He didn't answer immediately, but she didn't need him to. She already knew. She had seen it in his eyes at the gala, the way he looked at her, with longing, with regret. "No," he finally said, his voice low and defeated. "I don't love her." Li Shu's smile softened, but it wasn't kind. "Then why did you leave me for her? Why did you throw me away like I didn't matter?" "Because I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Li Shu leaned forward, her heart pounding with the weight of the moment. "You were scared?" she repeated, incredulously. "Of what? Of me? Of my love?" His gaze flickered away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't deserve you, Shu. You were too good for me, and I didn't know how to keep you." Li Shu's heart ached, but she quickly suppressed the feeling. She had been here before, but this time she wasn't going to fall for his words. This time, she was in control. "You never deserved me," she said softly. "But you'll learn something now. You'll learn what it feels like to beg for someone you can't have." She stood up, her movements deliberate, slow. Wei Zhihao stood with her, his hand reaching out toward her, but she stepped back, just out of his reach. "You don't get to have me," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Not anymore." Li Shu turned and walked toward the exit, the weight of the moment settling over her like a cloak. Behind her, she could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, but she didn't look back. She knew he was standing there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. This was the final stage of her plan, the part where she walked away and left him to face the consequences of his actions. The part where he realized that he had lost her, and that he would never get her back. Li Shu stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of the door closing behind her a quiet echo of the finality of what had just transpired. She had done it. She had broken him. And now, she was free. She had come a long way from the fragile girl who had once begged for his love. Now, she was the woman who had taken control of her own fate, and had made him realize just how powerless he truly was. In the days that followed, Wei Zhihao tried to reach out to Li Shu. He called, sent messages, even showed up at her apartment, but she didn't answer. She knew the damage had been done. She knew that in the end he would realize what he had lost, and he would be left with nothing. But Li Shu had no intention of going back. She was no longer the woman who had clung to him, desperate for his affection. She was no longer the girl who had believed his lies. She was the woman who had reclaimed her power and her life. As for Wei Zhihao, he would learn to live with the choices he had made. He would learn that some things once broken could never be fixed. And the love he had once taken for granted? It was gone. Forever. Li Shu had finally won. The days following her final confrontation with Wei Zhihao had been eerily quiet. Li Shu had grown accustomed to the chaos, the noise, the frantic pursuit that had marked her life for so long. But now there was peace. A silence that settled around her like the calm after a storm. It was strange in a way. She had fought so hard for so long to get to this point, to make him see her, to make him fall for her, and ultimately, to make him beg for something he could never have. And now that it was done, the world felt still. But that was the price of power, wasn't it? The ability to control others, to manipulate them into doing exactly what you wanted, could give you everything. But it also took something away. It left a hole, a hollow space inside you, where the love, the connection, once lived. Li Shu didn't regret it. Not in the slightest. But she couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The victory had come at a cost, not just to Wei Zhihao, but to her as well. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. It was a message from Zhang Hui, the one person she had managed to turn into a valuable ally in her war against Wei Zhihao. "I have news. Meet me in 2 hours. It's urgent." Li Shu's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. She had expected this. After all, Zhang Hui had been the one who helped her bring Wei Zhihao to the brink of destruction. But the question remained, what more could he possibly have to offer? She stood up from the chair by the window, her mind already working through the possibilities. The game was far from over. With Wei Zhihao out of the picture, there was still much to be done, more pieces to move, more people to control. Zhang Hui had been a useful pawn, but in the end, that's all he was. She had used him, but he had his own plans. It was time to see what those plans were. 2 hours later, Li Shu found herself sitting across from Zhang Hui in a quiet, upscale restaurant on the edge of the city. It wasn't the kind of place where you would find the elite, but rather a place that catered to those who preferred their business deals to remain discreet. Zhang Hui sat across from her, his face unreadable as always. But Li Shu could see the flicker of something in his eyes, an emotion, a calculation that was as dangerous as it was intriguing. She had learned long ago that Zhang Hui was not a man to be underestimated. He had his own ambitions, and those ambitions often didn't align with her own. "You've been quiet," Li Shu said, breaking the silence. "What's going on, Jiang Hui? What's so urgent?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a sip of his drink, his gaze drifting to the window as if he were contemplating his next move. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and steady, "about what comes next." Li Shu raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Next? We've already won, haven't we?" "Wei Zhihao is finished." Jiang Hui chuckled softly, but there was no humor in the sound. "Finished?" "Not quite. You've broken him, yes. But there's more at play here than just him. There's a power vacuum now, and power—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Power doesn't stay empty for long." Li Shu's expression hardened. "You're suggesting someone else will take his place?" Jiang Hui leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's always someone waiting in the wings. Someone who wants to seize control. Someone who's been watching this entire situation unfold, waiting for the right moment to step in." Li Shu didn't need him to elaborate. She already knew. There were always people in the shadows, waiting to take advantage of any weakness. And in the wake of Wei Zhihao's downfall, there were those who would see an opportunity to rise to power. "So, what do we do?" Li Shu asked, her voice cold, her mind already working through the possibilities. Jiang Hui's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "We don't just sit back and wait for someone else to take what's rightfully ours. We strike first. We consolidate power." Li Shu didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. She had already planned for this, had anticipated the chaos that would follow Wei Zhihao's fall. But there was something in Jiang Hui's tone, something in his eyes, that told her he had more in mind than she had originally realized. "You're not just talking about securing the power we have," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're talking about taking more." Jiang Hui's smile deepened. "Exactly. You've spent so long focusing on Wei Zhihao, but the truth is, the real power isn't in him. It's in the system, in the people who make the decisions, the ones who are pulling the strings behind the scenes." Li Shu leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "So, you're suggesting we start our own empire?" Jiang Hui nodded. "Why not? You've already shown that you can break down the most powerful man in the city. Why stop there?" For a moment, Li Shu was silent. The thought was tempting, but also dangerous. She had never intended to create an empire, never planned on becoming the puppet master pulling the strings of the city. But she had to admit, the idea had its appeal. "You're a smart woman, Li Shu," Jiang Hui continued, his voice low and steady. "But if you want to truly rule this city, you'll need more than just manipulation. You'll need an army of loyal followers. You'll need power in every corner, every business, every deal, every politician. I can help you with that. But you need to trust me. Trust that I have the connections you don't, that I know how to make things happen." Li Shu studied him carefully. This wasn't just a business proposal. This was a test, one that would determine whether she could take this thing even further. "And what's your price?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. Jiang Hui's eyes flickered, but his smile didn't waver. "My price? It's simple. I want you by my side, not as a partner, but as someone who understands the game as I do. We both know the truth. Power isn't just about who you control, but who you align yourself with." Li Shu's fingers drummed lightly on the table. She had learned long ago that trust was a fragile thing. But Jiang Hui was right about one thing. He had resources, connections, things she didn't. And if she wanted to take her control further, she couldn't afford to play this game alone. "So, you want a partnership," Li Shu said, her eyes narrowing. "You want to be the one pulling the strings with me." Jiang Hui nodded. "Exactly." Li Shu's mind raced as she weighed the offer. The power he promised wasn't just a means to an end. It was a new beginning, a new era. She could almost taste it, the kind of control that would make everything she had endured worth it. "All right," she said, her voice steady, her decision made. "Let's build this empire. Together." In the weeks that followed, Li Shu and Jiang Hui began their quiet conquest of the city's underworld. They moved quickly, consolidating power with precision, using every resource at their disposal to gather allies and eliminate threats. Li Shu's influence grew rapidly as she and Jiang Hui took control of key businesses, political figures, and influential players in the city. Wei Zhihao's fall had left a void, but Li Shu was no longer the broken girl seeking revenge. She was the architect of her own destiny, building an empire that would make her untouchable. But as the power shifted in her favor, Li Shu couldn't shake the feeling that she was becoming exactly what she had once despised. She had used people to get what she wanted, just as Wei Zhihao had. She had become the puppet master, pulling the strings in a world where nothing was ever truly as it seemed. And yet, even with all the power she now wielded, Li Shu realized something important. The price of power was never free. It came with sacrifices she would have to live with forever. Li Shu stood at the top of the skyscraper, looking out over the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled like stars, and for a moment, she almost forgot the weight of the world she had created. The empire she had built, the one she had fought for with every ounce of her being, was now in place. She had power. She had control. She had everything she had ever dreamed of. But what did it all mean? Her eyes narrowed as she thought back to how it all started. The girl who had been discarded, the woman who had played the game, who had manipulated the men around her, who had broken the one person who had once meant something to her. Was this victory? Or was it something far darker? Li Shu had spent the last few months consolidating power, working in the shadows, pulling strings that no one else could see. She had partnered with Jiang Hui, building an empire that would rival anything Wei Zhihao had ever dreamed of. They controlled everything: the city's finances, the major corporations, and even the underground dealings that kept the city's true power in check. But with power came enemies, and no matter how careful she had been, there were always those who wanted to take what she had worked so hard to achieve. Li Shu had always known this. She had always understood the precariousness of her position. The higher you climbed, the harder you fell. And now, as the empire she had built began to solidify, she was starting to feel the first stirrings of doubt. The message that came to her a few days ago had been unexpected, yet inevitable. Wei Zhihao had finally come to understand the gravity of his situation, and now, it seemed, he was ready to take one last stand. The letter was delivered to her office in the dead of night. No name. No return address. Just a thick envelope with a simple note inside. It read, "I've watched everything you've done, Sue, and now it's time for you to face the consequences. I've played your game, and now it's time for you to play mine." The handwriting was familiar. Wei Zhihao's. But why? Why now? Li Shu sat back in her chair, reading the letter over and over again, each word seeming to weigh heavier than the last. He had been quiet for so long, watching from the shadows, biding his time. And now, it seemed, he was ready to make his move. She didn't know what game he was playing now. But one thing was certain. It was a game that would change everything. The next evening, Li Shu found herself in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city, an unlikely location for a meeting with someone like Wei Zhihao. But then again, this wasn't just about business. This was personal. She had agreed to meet him, against her better judgment. But it was time to end this. Time to settle the score once and for all. When she arrived, he was already waiting for her, seated at a table in the corner, his back to the wall, watching the door as if he were expecting her. Li Shu stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her arrival, but she could feel the tension in the air between them. It was palpable, charged with the weight of everything they had both been through. "I didn't expect you to come," Wei Zhihao said, his voice low, his eyes still on the door. "You knew I would," she replied, her tone colder than she had intended. "You've been waiting for me. Waiting for this moment." Wei Zhihao finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, the same cool detachment he had worn during their previous encounters. But now there was something else there, something darker, something that hadn't been there before. "You've come a long way, Shu," he said, his voice almost gentle, though there was an edge to it. From the girl I discarded to the woman who now controls everything. You've built something remarkable. Li Shu didn't flinch. She had heard this praise before, and it meant nothing now. Not from him, not after everything they had been through. You didn't come here to compliment me, she said, her voice steady. So, what is it that you want, Wei Zhihao? What do you think you can still take from me? He paused, his eyes studying her carefully. I'm not here to take anything from you, Shu. I'm here to give you one last chance, to walk away from all of this. She raised an eyebrow. Walk away? You think I'm going to just walk away from the empire I've built? After everything? Wei Zhihao shook his head, a small, bitter smile playing at the edges of his lips. You've become everything you once hated, Shu. You've become the thing you swore you would never be. You're no better than the man you once fought to destroy. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. Was this what it had come to? A battle of ideologies? A battle between who they had once been and who they had become. Li Shu met his gaze with a cold, steely resolve. You've always thought you knew me, Wei Zhihao. But you don't. Not anymore. He sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation in his eyes. You think you have everything, but you're wrong. The power you've built, it's fragile. It can crumble in an instant, and when it does, you'll be the one left standing alone, just like you were before. Li Shu's smile was thin, but her eyes held a quiet fury. You don't get to tell me who I am. Not anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like an invisible chasm, one that had grown wider with each passing day, each passing decision. And then, finally, Wei Zhihao stood up, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm not asking you to walk away, he said, his voice low, almost threatening. But understand this, I won't let you destroy everything we've built. And if it means taking you down to protect it, I will. Li Shu's heart skipped again. But this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with certainty. She had won this game long ago. And now, as Wei Zhihao walked away, she realized that it was finally over. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Li Shu moved with purpose, keeping her empire intact, making sure that no one would dare take what she had fought so hard for. But even as she continued to solidify her position, there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Was it really worth it? The empire was hers, yes. But at what cost? She thought back to the girl she had once been, the one who had believed in love, in the possibility of something real. And now? Now she had everything. Everything except the one thing she had once longed for, peace. As the days turned into weeks, Li Shu found herself standing in front of her office window, staring out at the city. The lights still glimmered below, but now they seemed distant, hollow. She had built something powerful, something formidable. But in the end, it was just another tower, another fortress built on manipulation, deceit, and broken hearts. Was this the victory she had longed for? Was this the end? And then, it hit her. She had won, yes, but at what cost? The empire was hers, but her soul was lost. Years passed, and Li Shu's empire continued to thrive. But she was no longer the same woman who had climbed to the top, clawing her way through the ashes of her past. She had become something else, something colder, something harder. The power she wielded was both a gift and a curse. Wei Zhihao had disappeared from her life, but his words still echoed in her mind. You've become everything you once hated. Li Shu didn't know whether that was true or not. All she knew was that she had survived. And in this world, survival was all that mattered. As she stood at the top of her empire, looking out over the city she had conquered, she realized that she would never be the girl she had once been. She would never be the woman who believed in love. She had become something else entirely, and for better or worse, she had no intention of turning back. Li Shu stood in the same place she had stood countless times before, the grand office at the top of her skyscraper. The world sprawled beneath her, the lights flickering in the night like a constellation of possibilities. She could see everything from here, the empire she had built, the power she had claimed, the lives she had manipulated and discarded. But for all the success, for all the wealth and influence she commanded, there was a hollow space inside her. A space that no amount of power could fill. She had won. But at what cost? The faces of those she had left behind. The faces of those who had once loved her, haunted her. The countless betrayals, the lies, the manipulation, all of it had led to this moment. She had become everything she had once despised, ruthless, cold, and alone. Her reflection in the glass was all she had now. The girl she once was, innocent, hopeful, desperate for love, was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. She had carved her own path to power, but in doing so, she had lost herself. Li Shu had always been one to look forward, to chase after the next conquest, the next challenge. But now, with the empire firmly in her grasp, she found herself wondering what had been left behind. What had she truly achieved? Had she built something meaningful, or was it just another fortress to protect herself from the world? From him? Wei Zhihao. His face lingered in her mind, as it had for so long. He had been a part of her journey, both the reason for her pain and the reason for her power. And in the end, he had been just another casualty in her war for control. But it wasn't enough. She couldn't erase the emptiness she felt. Sitting at her desk, she opened a drawer and pulled out a small, worn notebook, one that she had kept for years. It had once been filled with hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. She flipped through the pages, the ink fading with time, but the memories were still sharp. The last page was blank. Li Shu stared at the empty page for a long time, her mind racing. She had spent so long focused on the game, on taking control, that she had forgotten to live. Forgotten what it meant to feel something real. She grabbed a pen and began to write. To the girl I used to be, I've done it. I've won. The empire is mine, the power is mine. But it feels like nothing. I thought that power would fill the empty space inside me, but it hasn't. It's only made the hole deeper. I've destroyed the man who hurt me, and yet I still feel his shadow lingering over me. Why? I've become everything I feared. Cold, heartless, alone. I've turned the game into my weapon, and now I wield it with precision, with purpose. But I don't know who I am anymore. I've broken everything to get here. But now that I'm here, I don't know if I want to stay. I've built something beautiful. I've built an empire, but I've also built a prison around myself, and I'm the only one inside it. I'm not sure what comes next. I'm not sure if I can change, but I know one thing. I can't stay like this. I won't. Maybe, one day, I'll find the answers. But for now, I'm going to try to find the girl I left behind. The one who believed in something more than just power. The one who had hope. Xu. Li Shu folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with a sigh. She had written it for herself, but also for the part of her that had been lost along the way. The part of her that had believed in love, in trust, in something beyond the superficiality of control. She had destroyed everything for this power. But now, the cost was too high. She had everything, wealth, influence, respect, but she was still empty. The empire she had fought for wasn't enough to fill the void she felt inside. And so, the decision was made. Li Shu picked up her phone and sent one simple message. It's time to let go. She didn't know where this journey would take her next. Maybe it would be to rebuild the pieces of herself that she had lost along the way. Maybe it would be to walk away from everything and disappear, leaving the empire she had built behind. Maybe it would be to start over, this time with a new purpose. But she knew one thing for certain: she would never be the same. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, but she was going to find out. Li Shu walked away from the life she had created, the empire, the power, the manipulation. She left behind the cold, heartless woman she had become, and began a new journey. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about healing. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The empire, once a symbol of her triumph, was no longer her burden. And as she stood in the sunlight, free from the shadows of the past, Li Shu realized something. Power had never been her true goal. It had been a mask, a shield to protect herself from the pain. But now she didn't need the shield anymore. She was ready to face the world as she was, flawed, vulnerable, and most importantly, free. Years later, when people spoke of Li Shu, they spoke of her not as the ruthless woman who had conquered an empire, but as the one who had walked away from it all. The woman who had found peace in the most unexpected way. Her name was still whispered in the streets, in boardrooms, in dark corners of the city, but it was no longer the name of a conqueror. It was the name of someone who had learned that true power didn't come from domination, but from knowing when to let go. Li Shu had won the game, but in the end, the real victory was finding herself again.